The station rotated slowly around a dim, aging star, as if even it had grown tired of pretending to be important. Inside one of its quieter rings, he stood in a narrow kitchen, arguing with a stove that insisted on interpreting low heat as mild explosion. The child behind him giggled, clapping as a puff of blue flame briefly tried to escape into the ceiling. "That's not cooking," he muttered, tapping the panel. "That's a threat." "What?" "It likes you," the child said, very seriously, as if defending the stove's emotional integrity. He sighed, surrendering the pan before it developed a personality. Life had become a series of small negotiations, most of them unwinnable. Still, there was a rhythm to it, a fragile, stubborn rhythm he had built piece by piece after she left. He tried not to think about that moment, but the station had a way of remembering for him. Every corridor held echoes. Every flicker of light felt like a replay. She had stood near the airlock, her long ears catching every unspoken word he couldn't bring himself to say. She looked almost human, but never quite. There was always something distant in her gaze, as if part of her belonged to a frequency he could never hear. Even then, she had smiled gently, like someone already halfway gone. "You'll be fine," she had said. He almost laughed at the time, not because it was funny, but because it was the kind of lie that didn't even try. The man beside her had leaned casually against the wall, confident in the way only fools and very rich people could afford to be. He gave a small nod, as if taking ownership of a situation that had never belonged to him. Then the airlock closed, and just like that, gravity shifted. Back in the kitchen, the child tugged at his sleeve. "Are we eating the fire or not?" He blinked, returning to the present with a quiet exhale. "We are absolutely not eating the fire." "Then what are we eating?" He looked at the ruined pan, considered his life choices, and said, "A very educational mistake." "What?" They ended up sitting by the window with nutrient packs that tasted like disappointment but were at least non-explosive. Outside, ships passed in slow arcs, their engines glowing faintly against the darkness. The universe moved on, indifferent and vast. "Will she come back?" the child asked suddenly, mouth full, tone casual in the way only children could manage when asking devastating questions. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he watched a distant cruiser drift past, its hull scarred from battles he would never know. "No," he said finally, his voice steady in a way that surprised even him, "and that's okay." It was not yet, but it would have to be. Later that night, after the child had fallen asleep curled around a malfunctioning toy drone that occasionally beeped like it was apologizing for existing, he sat alone in the dim light of the station. The silence pressed in, heavy but familiar. Something inside him had shifted. Not broken, no, that would have been simpler. It had hardened quietly, like metal cooling after being forced into a new shape. He didn't notice it fully. Not yet, but the universe did, and it began, in its own slow and merciless way, to take interest. The first time he accepted a job outside the station, it wasn't because he felt ready. It was because the repair bills had started to sound like threats. The maintenance drone had begun refusing to wake up without emotional compensation, which he suspected was just a polite way of saying it wanted a new processor. He couldn't afford that, so instead, he chose something far more dangerous: opportunity. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" the child asked, watching him strap on a borrowed utility harness that looked like it had survived several arguments with gravity. "Absolutely not," he replied, "but I intend to look confident enough that no one notices." The job was simple in theory: escort a small cargo vessel through a debris field left behind by a forgotten war. In reality, the debris included half-functioning defense satellites that occasionally woke up and chose violence out of nostalgia. As the ship drifted into the fractured field, alarms began whispering rather than screaming, a detail that somehow made it worse. He adjusted the controls, his hands steady in a way they hadn't been years ago. "Reminder," the ship's artificial intelligence chimed, "survival probability currently fluctuating between unlikely and statistically amusing." "What?" "Can you be less encouraging?" he muttered. "I can try," the AI replied. "New estimate, you are probably fine." That was worse. A dormant satellite suddenly flickered to life, its sensors locking onto the ship with unsettling enthusiasm. Without hesitation, he cut the engines, letting the vessel drift behind a massive shard of metal that once might have been something important. The satellite fired anyway, missing them by a margin that felt deeply personal. He didn't panic, not anymore. Instead, he waited, watched, calculated. There was a rhythm to danger, he realized, a pattern beneath the chaos. Once you saw it, fear became manageable, not gone, just quieter. They cleared the field with only minor damage and one existential crisis from the AI, which insisted on documenting the experience as emotionally distressing. The cargo reached its destination, and for the first time in years, he was paid more than survival required. One job became another, then another. He learned quickly, too quickly, some said. He negotiated with traders who smiled too much, outmaneuvered pirates who smiled too little, and once convinced an armed mercenary group to leave peacefully by pointing out that their ship's fuel system was quietly failing. It turned out honesty, when delivered at the right moment, could be more terrifying than threats. Back on the station, the child watched all of this with growing fascination. "So you're like a space hero now?" they asked one evening. He considered that while attempting to fix the same stubborn stove, which had somehow become even more aggressive in his absence. "No," he said, "heroes get dramatic music, I get repair bills." "But you win." He paused. "Yes," he admitted. "I do." And that was the difference. The man who had once stood helpless at an airlock was fading, replaced by someone sharper, quieter, and far more dangerous to underestimate. He wasn't chasing power. He wasn't even aware he was building it, but others were starting to notice. Ships began requesting him by name, then systems, then people he had never met started speaking about him as if they had always known he would become this. One night, as he stood by the window watching distant stars flicker like faulty lights, the child joined him, now taller, more observant. "Do you ever think about her?" they asked. He didn't answer immediately. Somewhere deep inside, the memory was still there, but it no longer hurt the same way. It had changed, like everything else. "I think about what she taught me," he said finally. "What was that?" "What?" He looked out at the endless dark, his reflection barely visible against it. "That leaving is easy," he said. "Staying, that's where the real work begins." Behind him, the station hummed quietly, unaware that within its walls something was taking shape, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a certainty the universe would soon have no choice but to acknowledge. By the time she returned, the station no longer recognized him as a resident. It recognized him as leverage. His ship did not dock, it was granted entry. "Reminder," the AI said as systems aligned with unnatural efficiency, "you are now important enough to be blamed for things you didn't do." "What?" "Good," he replied calmly. "That means I've made progress." The child, no longer a child, though still carrying that same sharp curiosity, leaned back in the co-pilot's seat. "So this is the part where your past dramatically walks through a door, right?" "Statistically speaking," he said, "yes." She was already there, standing in the central corridor as if she had never left, her long ears catching every whisper of movement around her. For a moment, time did something inconvenient and slowed down. She looked the same, almost perfectly preserved by whatever choices she had made, though her eyes carried something new. Not wisdom, not quite regret, something heavier. "You've changed," she said softly. He considered that. "I've upgraded." The child snorted. "That's not even a good line." "It wasn't for you," he replied without looking. She stepped closer, careful, as if approaching something that might vanish, or worse, respond. "I made a mistake." "Yes," he said simply. There was no anger in his voice. That unsettled her more than anything else could have. "I thought I wanted something else," she continued, her voice tightening. "A different life. I thought it would be better." "And was it?" She hesitated. That was answer enough. Behind them, a maintenance drone rolled past, paused dramatically, and whispered, "This feels important," before continuing on. No one acknowledged it. "I want to fix this," she said. "I want to come back." The child tilted their head, studying her with open curiosity. "You mean like permanently, because we just reorganized everything?" He almost smiled. "You left," he said, his tone calm but unmovable. "Not because you had to, because you wanted to. That matters." "I know," she said quickly. "I know, and I regret it." "Regret is easy," he replied. "It doesn't require anything except time." Silence stretched between them, heavy but clear. She looked at him, really looked this time, and whatever she expected to find, the man she left, the one who would break or forgive without question, was gone. In his place stood someone steady, shaped by years that had not asked for permission. "So that's it?" she asked quietly. "There's nothing left." He thought about it, not long, but long enough to be honest. "There's something left," he said. "But it's not what you want it to be." The child crossed their arms. "We're not exactly taking applications for mother right now." "That's not helping," he said. "It's a little helping." "What?" She exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering as the reality settled in. Not dramatically, not all at once, just enough. "What happens now?" she asked. He glanced toward the observation window, where ships moved in careful patterns around the station, each one part of something larger. "Now," he said, "now you build whatever comes next, the same way I did." She nodded faintly. There was nothing else to argue with. As she turned to leave, there was no grand moment, no final words that tried to rewrite history. Just a quiet understanding that some choices didn't end, they echoed. The child watched her go, then looked at him. So, that's it. That's it. They stood there for a moment before the child nudged him. You handled that very well. I was expecting at least one dramatic speech. I'm saving it, he said, for when the stove tries to kill me again. Fair. Later, as the station lights dimmed and the endless dark pressed gently against the glass, he stood alone for a moment, not out of loneliness but choice. He wasn't the man who had been left behind. He wasn't even the man who survived it. He was something else entirely, and for the first time that felt like enough. The message arrived 3 cycles later, encoded in a frequency no one used unless they had something to hide or something to lose. His ship flagged it immediately. Priority signal, the AI said. Also mildly dramatic, I approve. He didn't answer right away. He already knew who it was from. The child, now leaning more toward adulthood than anything else, glanced over. Are we opening it, or are we pretending we didn't see it like emotionally healthy people? We've never done that, he said, tapping the console. The message unfolded into a fragmented transmission. Her image flickered unstable, her long ears twitching with interference rather than sound this time. I didn't come back just for forgiveness, she said, voice strained. I didn't know how to tell you they're coming. What? Of course they are, the AI muttered. They always are. They found me years ago, she continued. The ones I ran to, they weren't just careless, they were connected. I thought I could leave that behind, but I was wrong. They've been tracking me. Now they've tracked you. The transmission cut briefly, then resumed with a burst of static. They don't want negotiation, she said. They want control, and you've become something they can't ignore. Silence filled the cockpit. The child exhaled slowly. So your past isn't just emotional, it's also heavily armed. Seems inefficient, he replied. Outside, the station shifted. Defense grids powered up like a waking giant, ships repositioning with sharp precision. Word had already spread. What do we do? The child asked. He stood there for a moment, not thinking about fear or anger or even her, just the pattern. The same pattern he had learned to read years ago in a field of broken machines and forgotten wars. We don't wait, he said. The response was immediate. Orders moved faster than light, alliances snapping into place. Fleets aligned not because they were forced to, but because they trusted him. Somewhere along the way, without noticing, he had built something stronger than power. He had built belief. The enemy arrived like a storm that thought itself inevitable. Ships carved through space with brutal confidence, weapons lighting the void in sharp, unforgiving bursts. Survival probability, he asked. The AI paused, unclear but emotionally, this is very exciting. Good enough. The battle was